A friend I was talking to recently mentioned that he was thinking about buying a house, and his family had recommended he buy something like a duplex condo, so he could rent out one of the units and use the rent to cover the mortgage on the property. That idea made him very uncomfortable. In his words, he said, "It feels like such a scam." And if you ask the internet, a lot of people agree. You can find endless Reddit and Quora threads about how landlords are evil parasites who just drive up the price of housing and contribute nothing to society. So, are they right? Obviously, there are some terrible landlords out there. The question today isn't whether there are unethical landlords, because that's just a given.
It's Mr. Landlord! Hello, Mr. Landlord!
The question is whether the very act of buying a property to rent it out even can be ethical. A few caveats to address this question. First, we're disregarding the obvious evil. Landlords that illegally or borderline illegally exploit their tenants by leaving houses in disrepair or forcing them into insane contracts and so on are obviously just bad. And everyone can agree there. I think we can also agree that big Wall Street investment companies buying up vast swaths of real estate is terrible for the housing market. Second, we are not diving into economic systems today. The conversation I had with my friend quickly turned into a conversation about whether capitalism is broken and whether a different economic system would fix it, and that's not the point of this video. Obviously, if you're a Marxist, you don't think that landlords are ethical. And if you're a laissez-faire capitalist, then you think that they are. That's a given. So we're just going to talk about the current reality of any country where you actually can buy an investment property, not hypothetical ideals of what it could be like if everything was different. All right, let's go. Landlords, much like investors and business owners, really get a bad rap, primarily from people who have never been one. Part of the problem is that these are all ways that you can make money as long as you already have money.
You gotta spend money to make money.
So if you don't have money, it feels like these people are just using their piles of cash to take advantage of people with less by doing nothing. But that overlooks some important pieces of the puzzle, namely risk and responsibility. This winter, an ice dam formed on my roof, then leaked through the ceiling and onto the head of my sleeping 1-year-old. Not cool. Back when I was renting, I would have called my landlord and they would have fixed it. Now that I own my own house, I either need to hire someone to fix it, or I need to go buy sheetrock and insulation and tear out my roof and fix it myself. There are a lot of unexpected repairs and expenses that a good landlord should be dealing with that as a renter you don't have to. And anytime you shoulder risk for someone else, there's a cost. Shoot, insurance is literally nothing else. Insurance does nothing but get paid for holding risk. As a landlord, just having a tenant is a risk. They can trash the property, leave in the middle of the night, and now you have a big money hole. Not only do you have to fix it, but you have to keep paying utilities and property taxes and insurance while it sits empty during the fixing. The other big risk is that a landlord has no liquidity or mobility. I've lived in some pretty boom or bust places, where one year the housing market is really hot, lots of people moving in, money everywhere, everything's great, and then a couple years later it's all downhill. Being a landlord during the boom is great. During a bad year, not so much. The people who took temporary jobs can just pick up and move somewhere else. But homeowners can't leave until they sell their house. And if the market got bad enough, sometimes they can't even afford to sell the house. That's pretty rare in the current housing market, but it does happen. Now that's a decent argument against the people who say that landlords don't do anything, because they do shoulder risk and responsibility, which is a service, even though it's a service that none of us really like. The bigger argument by most is that they do more harm than good by buying up all the entry-level properties so nobody can afford to buy a starter home and build equity. And I wholeheartedly agree that this is a bad outcome. There are some markets where landlords buying all the cheap homes is kind of a good thing. If the housing market isn't super tight, They end up improving neighborhoods by buying super rundown houses and fixing them up. And in those markets, this doesn't really matter. But in the markets where it matters, it really matters. And it's also a bit of a catch-22. Let's look at my experience, because that's the only experience I've lived, so it's kinda all I got to work with. One of the best places to own a rental is anywhere remotely near a college. I went to college at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, which is barely more than a village by most of the world's standards. But it's big for Wyoming. I rented 4 different places while I lived there, and because I'm a pretty frugal guy, most of them were quite cheap. But I only had one landlord that was pretty sketchy, and it was a big apartment complex that probably had corporate overlords. Laramie is a great example of a place that needs good landlords. The population jumps by around 50% during the school year. The students aren't going to be buying houses, and they need places to live, so landlords are providing a necessary service to the community. But when my wife and I graduated from college, we decided we didn't want to live like college students anymore. So we wanted to see if we could buy a house to settle in as real live residents. And the answer was no. Starter family homes just didn't exist in Laramie, because no matter how small or run down a property was, it was worth it to pay a premium, because you could always rent it out to students and pay it off eventually. This meant that all the non-humongous properties cost double what they did in the rest of the state. So we left, and we moved to somewhere cheaper. But we were at a point in our lives where we didn't have established careers yet, so we could do that. That isn't always an option. And people who are getting early jobs in towns like Laramie find themselves in the position where they would like to buy a home, if affordable homes even remotely existed, and instead they are forced into renting, and that sucks. This made me realize something. Anti-landlord people often say that landlords are predatory, and that is actually a great metaphor. Not because they're evil and take advantage of the helpless, but because housing markets are a delicate ecosystem, and landlords are kind of at the top of the food chain. If you don't have any predators in an ecosystem, it gets out of balance and everything starves to death. But if you have too many predators in a population, everything gets out of balance and starves to death. Towns like Laramie, and honestly most cities and towns, need landlords. But if you get too many landlords, it can come around to hurt people. It's a delicate balance. And one of the ways that it gets balanced is through interest rates. I don't know how it is in other countries, but at least in the United States, right now interest rates are much higher than they were before. The bad news is that higher interest rates make it much harder for people to buy a first home because it drastically increases the monthly payment. But it also makes landlording less appealing, because instead of buying a rental property, you could just invest that money in a variety of other places and make the same return for way less work and responsibility. So then housing prices get driven down and stuff changes, and there's a lot of other factors that I won't get into here because we're quickly getting outside my area of expertise. So on a micro scale, you can most definitely be an ethical landlord. Not only do they exist, there are many of them. But on a macro scale, there are also clearly some valid concerns. But I am not an economist, so I don't have that many great ideas on how to fix those issues. But this is the internet, so I'm sure you do, and you'll let me know in the comments, which will be interesting. If you think landlords mess up the market, just wait until you hear about small town Airbnbs. When I finish my video on them, it'll be right here, and until then there will be something else YouTube thinks you'll like. Now get out there, make the world a better place.